Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vote.ga's candidate question time. I'm Gwyn Garfield-Bennett and I'm going to be your host this evening. We are going to be talking to the deputies for St Clement, or deputy candidates I should say, not deputies, and we're going to be talking to everybody in name order. So I'm going to ask you just to say good evening so everybody knows who you are. So first of all we have Ken Addison. Ken, you're from Jersey.
That's right. Good evening.
Lindsay Ash, who is standing with Jersey Alliance.
Good evening.
Philip Balash, who is standing with the Jersey Liberal Conservatives.
Good evening.
Mark Boliat. Mark is standing with Jersey Alliance.
Good evening.
Alex Curtis. Alex is an independent.
Good evening.
And then Barbara Ward, who is also an independent.
Good evening.
And then we have online, hopefully joining us, I'm not sure if Karen Wilson is here yet, but she's also an independent. I don't know if Karen can hear us now. Maybe not at the moment. We will try to sort that one out. Okay, right. I'm just going to give you an idea of what this, how this will all work. So, the rules for candidate question time are this. Effectively, as members of the public, we want you to ask your questions of the candidates. So each candidate will be asked the very same question. They will have 1 minute in which to answer your questions. All we ask is that you give your name and that you keep the questions brief and that you keep them clean, and that you try to make sure the questions are focused on St Clement. You can also upvote the questions, so you'll see at the side of the questions on your screen that there is a thumbs up button. So if you agree with somebody else's question and you can upvote it, then we can see that. Now I'm going to put this on my lap now, so I'm not giving any candidates an unfair advantage seeing the question first.
Looking.
I'm sure you won't. I'm sure you won't. So we do have a question straight in from John Shenton. So I am going to ask that question first. So Ken, please can all the candidates confirm that they have been resident and ordinarily resident in Jersey for the last 3 years, and that they've paid Jersey tax on all the worldwide income, and that all their worldwide income has been declared to Revenue Jersey?
Okay. Thank you, John. I came to Jersey in 1975. I've lived in St Clement for the past 30 years. I paid Jersey tax, and I don't have any worldwide investments. So I hope that answers your question.
Good evening, John. What little income I have, I pay the tax in Jersey.
Yes, John, I think the answer to your question, so far as I'm concerned, is yes.
I moved back to Jersey last November. I'm resident in Jersey, otherwise I couldn't stand for election, not for the last 3 years, for the last 6 months, but for 5 years before then. In terms of tax, yes, I'm liable to Jersey tax, but sadly the UK tax man thinks I'm liable to English income tax instead. So I'm liable in both jurisdictions, and how much I pay in each is governed by the double tax agreement.
Okay, Alex.
And yes, I've been here for the last 3 years. I did return in the beginning of 2019 to make this my home, and yes, all my income does sadly get paid to Jersey. Currently double taxed, I have to say, and that's something I've not enjoyed, but I have paid every penny to the Jersey taxman.
Thank you, John, for asking. I've been in Jersey since 1979, and I've lived in St Clement for the past 33 years, and I obviously pay all my tax as requested by the income tax department.
Karen Wilson, can you hear us now? I'm not sure if you're online yet. We don't seem to have Karen yet. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you for your question, John. So, okay, we've got the next question is from Dave Crocker. It's another tax-related question. Our tax system is broken and only serving the wealthy and those who don't pay tax, leaving the burden on the working poor, says Dave Crocker. So we're going to go first with that one to Lindsay.
I don't think it is broken. It needs tweaking. It has been tweaked this time because we've tweaked certain things like single people's tax allowed. So women can now ring the tax office up and get their tax affairs, which they weren't allowed to. In fact, they were referred to as chattels of the husband, which is an absolute disgrace, but Susan Canal has changed that. It's interestingly, off the top of my head now, but I think the top 10% of tax earners pay something like 40% of the tax on the island. So it doesn't all fall on the lower tax threshold at all. In fact, I think the bottom 50% of earners pay something like 10-20% of the tax. So it's very much the tax burden falls on those who earn more.
I don't think that the tax system is broken, but I do think it does need some attention, particularly in relation to corporate tax. As many people will know, companies in Jersey are not, generally speaking, taxed at all, although some companies are taxed at the rate of 10%, financial services companies in particular, and some utilities companies are taxed at 20%. So this is not very logical, and I think not very fair either. It was introduced because we were in effect required to introduce something of that kind by the European Union. But I think it's something that we can look at because although we want to ensure that international business can remain in the island, we, I think, can achieve that while changing the system too.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark.
I don't believe the tax system is broken. Any tax system can be improved, and all of the time we need to look for improvements. Over the last few years, we've had the introduction of separate taxation of husband and wife. Disgraceful that it's taken so long for this to happen in Jersey. That's been a lot of work, a lot of administrative work, teething problems, and similarly the change to current year basis had to be done, but transitional problems inevitably occur, and they've been dealt with. Jersey does have a progressive tax system because there are high tax thresholds such that many people pay no tax at all, and the rich do pay most of the tax. On corporate tax, the objective is to get the maximum amount of revenue, and that's about balancing rates to get business into Jersey. So we've got to get the rate right to get the maximum amount of tax. That means higher rates. I'm all in favour, but sometimes it can mean lower rates to get more business.
Okay, thank you. Alex.
Well, I think I'll agree that it's not a broken system, but one that's in need of reform. I think we've seen a move from a split between corporate tax and personal tax move heavily towards a personal tax funded model. And I think we need to make sure that businesses that are operating in Jersey but may not be headquartered, may not be owned in Jersey, are in a fair tax position compared to those that are owned locally, that are running locally. And it's really about fairness across tax and social security to make sure we're not fostering a needs-based system on one end, but also exploitation on the other.
Okay, Barbara?
Yeah, I think there are changes that do need to be made. I have been onto the tax office many, many times, more so than I've ever in the whole of 40 years I've lived in Jersey. The 20 means 20, the threshold of where 20% kicks in, I think that needs to be really looked at. I think it's because it's hitting the middle earners. And the middle earners are your teachers, your professional staff. It's not your high earners, the ones who are in high finance. It's the ones who are got their families, which means they don't get any personal allowance, family allowance, they don't get children's allowance. That really does need looking at. So we put money actually back into people's pockets so that they can actually spend. There's also the double taxation on your social security pension. That needs to be changed. Double taxation. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. I will call on Karen again. And oh, sorry. Yeah. No, it's Karen is next, just in case she is there online. I don't think we managed to get hold of Karen yet. Not hearing anything, so I will, yes, of course, go to Ken.
Well, we at Reform Jersey do feel that the tax system needs changing. If you'd like to go to our manifesto, we set out in detail how we'll go about that. We will move everyone onto the marginal rate of tax, but at a lower percentage. We'll make it 25%. We will scrap the 20 means 20. The net effect of this proposal is that those on lower incomes will have a small saving on their income tax. The middle earners will either have no change or they will have a slight saving, and those on the higher end of income will pay slightly more. The overall effect of that is to generate an additional £6 million worth of taxation revenue. But please look at the manifesto, the details are in there.
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. Okay, just a reminder for everybody online, you can ask your questions. Please go into the question box, ask your questions, and you can upvote them. We've got questions upvoted here now. We've got the top two questions are actually basically the same, so I'm going to read them together. There's one from B and there's one from Mal White. And the question is from B is, can you tell me what you've done in the past 4 years to benefit St Clement? And Mal White's was what you have done, sorry, it's disappeared down the line, what you have done in the last 3 years, I believe is what Mal said. So it's basically the same question. What have you achieved or contributed to the parish in the last 3 years? So I'm going to go first to Philip for the answer.
If the question is what have I done for St Clement in the last 4 years, I'm afraid the answer is specifically not very much. And perhaps that leads me on to explain why I'm standing at St Clement, because I live in Greville. I'm standing in St Clement because I'm a representative of the JLC, the Jersey Liberal Conservatives, and we have no other candidates who are standing for election in this parish. We do, however, have a candidate who is standing in Greville and St Martin, and so that's really the reason why I'm sitting around this circle this evening.
Mark?
I'm happy to agree with Sir Philip, I think. No, I have only moved back to Jersey at the end of last year, but St Clement's has been my home parish. My father was born in the parish, my grandfather was the parish foreman, and my great-grandfather came here to dig potatoes in the 19th century. So I can't claim to have done anything specifically for the parish in the last year, but when I decided to come back to Jersey, I was never in any doubt that St Clement was the parish I wanted to stand in. And we wanted somebody to stand in every constituency as well, but we've got two standing in St Clement because both of us have got very strong connections with the parish.
Alex?
Well, I was born in Jersey, grew up in St Clement. I don't live in St Clement, and there are candidates here who have done a lot for the St Clement community support groups, who I think would be assets. What have I done in particular for St Clement? Well, I've actually fought for the protection of employment land and for the protection of industry in St Clement. The island plan process for the Bridging Island plan went through recently, and in that I got very involved in the consultation and the public inquiry, fighting that the remaining employment land across the island must be protected. But in particular, with the inspectors, I called out St Clement, and I said that we must be protecting our hotel space in St Clement because we need a variety of industry. And sadly, we are seeing applications come for further losses of hotels, but I made a case directly for that. And secondly, I would also say, whether it's an integration or not, I wouldn't say so, but I started a local business in St Clement, which I was operating a distillery there. So bringing industry into St Clement, I'd like to think is a bit different and something showing others can use St Clement as a place for work.
I've lived in the parish the past 33 years, but I've actually been working full time, and the work indirectly that I've done for St Clement's is working with the Variety Club for children in Jersey, where we've actually donated monies to different schemes, and we hold our tabletop down at St Clement's Parish Hall. So it is a secondary contribution to the parish, but other than that, I haven't, like my two colleagues here, who haven't directly done very much for St Clement's until now.
Okay, I think we're going to assume that Karen isn't joining us, aren't we, this evening? So go to Ken.
So since I retired, I've been very active in the parish. I've worked with the St Clement support team, delivering food parcels to vulnerable islanders, taking patients to GP appointments and to the hospice for respite care. I've worked with the Christians Against Poverty charity, where we help islanders who are finding it really difficult to make ends meet and who are struggling with debt. With my dog Milo, I visited the Little Sisters of the Poor. Okay, that's not in St Clement, but we did that on a regular basis to give some fun and some respite to the residents there. I also helped form a subgroup which lobbied the Environment Minister, and we successfully got 5 fields rejected from the Bridging Island plan.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on, that's Lindsay.
Thank you. This is probably an easier question for me as the deputies, because it's difficult to put it all into 1 minute. Like Ken, I worked very hard with John Young to have the fields protected, which was one of my pledges last time. I'm grateful that none of the fields have been attacked, if you want to put it that way, in St Clement. They've been left to one side. I got disabled parking put in at FB Fields following requests from St Patrick's Church from disabled parishioners. I've obviously handled a myriad of emails, particularly on tax, where I've managed to help people out. I've done 3 or 4 quiz nights for the Battle of Flowers Association, which was very enjoyable. It's much better asking the questions than having to answer them, I can say that now. So quite a considerable amount, but a lot of it, 10 seconds left, a lot of it has just been helping individual parishioners, which has been a joy, I've got to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, just to change things up, is from Dave Crocker. It's about housing. Dave says that the housing shortage is roughly 4,000 to 5,000. Do you agree that St Saviour and St Clement have already shared the burden and enough is enough? So that goes first to Mark.
I think St Clement and St Saviour have had more than their fair share over the years, but I think you can ask this question of every single parish and you'll get the same answer. We've had more than our fair share. And the fact is we do need more housing. It's very clear we need more housing. This is a big problem we hear, not just from the young people who are struggling to buy a home, but from businesses. And we just don't want our young people to be forced to leave the island in order to find somewhere to live. So we do need more housing. But I don't think we need to spoil our environment to do that. We're seeing much more dense occupation in St Helier, which is very welcome. We've got smaller provision for car parking. We've got taller buildings, not skyscrapers, but a few stories higher. And we need to do that in order to provide the housing that people want. But the Bridging Island plan, I think, is good for St Clement. It's been recognised that the parish has done more than its fair share.
Alex.
I'd start by saying I'm not sure we do need 4,500 to 5,000 new homes immediately. And I think some of those numbers come from the objective assessment for housing need, which assumed a 1,000 plus migrationary figure. And what I would say is we need to make sure when we are building housing, it is suitable for our needs. Firstly, yes, no to more large housing developments in St Clement. Everyone who gets a letter in their door will see that is one of my key messages that I deliver. But secondly, when we are building, and I think St Saviour's actually taking a lot, and we've seen just a congestion around the infrastructure around Five Oaks. But when we are building, it must be suitable. And I think denser development by itself has not resulted in greater quality of life for people who live in it. And we need to make sure that if we are going to create places where people live for 10 or 15 years in flats in St Helier, that really the minimum standards that people live in there are things that they can start by having their first child and can enjoy a little more than maybe our current minimum standards.
Thank you.
In St Clement's, we've had more than our fair share of development. And what has happened is that we've got this development, but they haven't put the infrastructure in first. It's looking at nurseries, looking at junior schools, looking at secondary schools. So you bring in all the extra housing in, but where do their children and their families utilise which schools? All the schools are full to bursting. So certainly in St Clement's, enough is enough.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to Ken.
St Clement has had more than its fair share of development. Reform Jersey has formulated its own housing action plan, a copy of which is attached to our website. Essentially, what we would want is that any land that is government owned needs to be released to our affordable housing providers and not to developers, so that the cost of building those houses will be less. We want to see much firmer regulation on builders. So at the moment, if a builder builds 100 houses, only 15 of those houses have to be for affordable housing or first-time buyers. We believe that that's just completely wrong, and that definitely needs to be looked at. So on the first day of the reformed Jersey government, we will put in place our housing action plan and give it to the civil servants.
Thank you. Lindsay.
I think Barbara's 100% correct about St Clement with the schools, youth facilities. Lynn Norman was very strong on that, where he said, you're building all this stuff, what are you giving us back? Nothing. And it's something I've looked at, and it's something that's strong in the Alliance manifesto. As far as St Saviour's is concerned, there's the hospital site that will be coming up. I'd like to see a mixed development there for first-time buyers, retirement homes, just a general mixed community, possibly with a new smaller primary school there as well. What I would like to see, and it's not yet part of our manifesto, but I'd like to see it become it, is that whole development at St Saviour's to have a covenant on it that allows it to be used by owner-occupiers only. So thus anybody buying something there would not be able to rent it out. And I think more of our properties we should look at doing.
Okay, thank you. Philip?
I don't think that the provision of sites for housing is really a parochial matter. I think it's an island-wide issue, and I think it ought to be resolved in an island-wide way. I understand the feelings of those who feel that too much green fields have been developed in St Clement, and that may well be the case. But in finding sites for building, we really have to look at things on an island-wide basis. I don't approve of building on green fields anywhere, as a matter of fact. I think there are enough brownfield sites and other places where development can take place. And I think that's where we should concentrate on for building purposes.
Thank you. Okay, and just a reminder for you at home, you can ask your questions, please do so, and you cannot vote questions, which will get them to the top of the list. And I've got the top of this one now, which is from Emily Lequiro, who has asked, could you please tell us how you would support the growth of small businesses in Jersey? And we'll start with Alex for that one.
Well, as a small business owner, I feel somewhat qualified to talk on this one, and a business that spans a few ideas from being a producer to having a shop, which I have in town, that wants to explore the future of retail. And I think one of the hardest things for businesses that are able to run in a digital fashion, those connected to making things, is actually the space to run a business from. So I've fought for the last 5 years against planning applications that seek to take away employment land. So that be agriculture, that be tourism. I actually for office as well, to say, when we safeguard this land, we make it more affordable. We are not preventing the conversion of sites for different uses, but we are saying that actually we want the market to play out, that it's easier and cheaper for people to get access to their employment land, be it a shop. And also we probably need to look at the rental clauses people have. 9-year upward only rental clauses are making it very hard for people to rent properties in a pop-up shop manner.
Okay, Barbara?
I actually have had a small business, and that was up at the airport. And I have to say that the population control, the Financial Service Commission, all the checks and the balances, it was like pushing against an open door. So, and within 3 weeks we were up and running. I couldn't believe how easy it was to actually get that business, small business, just two of us, engineering business. I was doing the books, my partner, he was the engineer. So Jersey was excellent in helping us go forward. I can't speak at what it's like now, but I can only speak for when it wasn't, going back 2012-13, and the system in place was excellent.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So the cost of doing business needs to be looked at. And some of our proposals help with bringing in people from the mainland by increasing the minimum wage, by removing GST on food, which will help people find work easier here. We have all of that set out in our manifesto. But yes, making rates more affordable in town and generally reducing the cost of doing business.
Lindsay?
Okay. I think we do fairly well in encouraging small businesses. I think we're very entrepreneurial as an island and always have been. It's almost a tradition in Jersey. There is a lot of red tape these days wrapped around any business. When you're a large business, such as a big bank or something, you have people who can handle that. It's not difficult. When you're a small business with national insurance for the employees, etc., it can be a burden, and we could certainly look to help that. I think government spending could help, so investment, and I think it was great to see the money that we got, or some of the money we got from the sale of the IoT business for Jersey Telecom, £20 million being put towards Jersey Digital to help new businesses set up and to move it forward, because we do have to look at that aspect of new business in Jersey.
Okay, thank you, Philip.
Small businesses are the lifeblood of the island. And I think it's worth recalling that the majority of businesses in Jersey are actually small businesses. I'm not sure that we always do what we should do for the support of small business. And quite often the state brings in things which are thought to improve life, but don't consider the specific interests of small businesses to a sufficient extent. An example of that I think was in maternity and paternity benefit, which recently were improved, some would say, but without much regard, I think, for the interests of small businesses.
Thank you, Mark.
I ran a one-man business for some years, including doing some work in Jersey. I have to say at the beginning, I decided not to employ anybody because it was just so difficult. I think Jersey does rather well. We're in digital Jersey, which does a great job in respect of technology businesses. Jersey Business gives a great deal of help. The Chamber of Commerce provides valuable help for businesses. So I don't think we're all that bad, but I do agree on red tape. I spent a lot of my life dealing with regulation. I've sat on the Regulatory Policy Committee in Britain. When I did my last job for Jersey as a one-man business for a small contract, the contract was 65 pages. The instructions of how to get paid were, I think, 30 lines. So the government itself can do something in its procurement for small businesses. And yet we need to look at red tape. And what worries me in Jersey is that laws do not have a cost-benefit analysis. They do not analyse the effect on business. That needs to change.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a reminder for anybody who's just joined us, Karen Wilson isn't in the room, but of course she is standing as a deputy for St Clement. We had hoped she would join us online, but we don't seem to be able to get hold of her. So unfortunately she isn't able to answer your questions, which you can do, and please also upvote questions. So top of my list now is a question from Glyn Mitchell, which I think you probably guess roughly what that's going to be about. Jersey is a signatory to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are intended to be achieved by 2030. If elected, do you believe it should be mandatory for government departments, banks, and other large corporations to publish their routes to net zero and prove they are reducing or avoiding and removing scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? Or do you think we do not change anything? Okay, that one's going to go to Barbara. That was a long question.
Thank you very much indeed. One, I don't know enough about the question that you've just asked for me to give you a solid and sound response, and I'd apologise for that. But maybe I could get in touch with you after the show and we can have a conversation, and you can educate me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's what it's all about, Ken.
The short answer is yes. We need to fulfil our commitment. We need to make Jersey a greener place to live. We can do that in various ways. So, for example, Jersey is blessed with a beautiful environment. We get sun, we get wind, we've got waves. It is possible for Jersey to generate its own electricity through these attributes. The French are currently building a large wind farm just off Saint-Brieuc. Why doesn't Jersey do something similar? Why don't we ensure that all new buildings have either solar panels on them or perhaps a roof garden? But we must start taking our environmental responsibilities much more seriously. Thank you.
Okay, Lindsay, thank you.
I think we live in a beautiful environment in Jersey, and we'd all agree with that. And I think it's very important to protect our own environment first. I'm a big fan of that, much more than I am of paying offsets in various parts of the world to build trees while we burn carbon. I think we need to address it here. As far as forcing companies to do it, I do not like state interference in that way. I would also say that most of the banks, etc., and finance houses here are very ecologically aware as far as recycling and as far as their heating energies, and have taken huge steps. And I think the public generally are moving towards a recycling mode and have become much more ecology aware, it's not easy to say, than we were. So I don't think we need a heavy-handed approach. I think we should carry the public with us.
Thank you. Philip?
Yes, I mean, I agree that things need to move considerably faster in relation to protecting the environment than they have done in the last 4 years or so since the state's declared a climate emergency. We have had some work done by a panel of individual members of the public, and that produced an extremely useful report as to the way forward. Like Lindsay, I don't think I'm in favour of compulsion unless it's really a last resort. I'm much more in favour of encouraging businesses and companies to do the right thing. And that, I think, would be my approach.
Thank you, Mark.
I largely agree with the last two comments. Our last question was very much about regulation and the burden of regulation. And here we have a question which says, let's have a lot more regulation. And let's pick on the banks. Well, the big banks, the British banks, they declare all of this in their annual reports because they're obliged to anyway. And if we're going to impose this on small businesses, it's another burden. And if we don't impose it on small businesses, well, that's why. You know, if it needs to be done for some businesses, do it for all. So I fully support Jersey playing its part in meeting the goal, the sustainable development goals, in protecting our environment, in reducing emissions. But we need to do it in a way that does not require an army of civil servants to make new rules and then put a burden on businesses to have to report.
Thank you, Alex.
This is a challenge with being the last to go. Because was the question around states departments?
It was everything.
For states departments.
It's the signatory of the Sustainable Development Goals should be mandatory for government departments, banks, and other large corporations to publish their roads to net zero.
I think, I've worked on technical projects in delivering sustainability, whether it be energy producers or actually in agriculture. And I think there's always a risk of looking at it through the lens of metrics and pure metrics. And as I think Lindsay said, the offsetting alone means you could be a carbon neutral company by being incredibly unprofitable and spending your money on carbon credits. What I'd like to see is government actions and departments clearly and transparently identify the actions they can take step by step to reduce what their emissions are. I think we need to look at the arm's length bodies. We need to look at JDC and ask, should it be developing in concrete? And is the construction sources of new developments that the government do on capital projects sustainable? And I think we just need to look broader at, are we tracking the correct actions and incentives we need for that, not just raw metrics that people can score points with.
Thank you. This means I need some water because I'm coughing because it's the air conditioning. Excuse me one moment. Okay, thank you very much. And as explained, Karen is not with us, unfortunately, so she can't answer that question. Okay, going to move on. I don't want to be unfair in the way that we're asking questions here, because the next question, which has been upvoted, does mention the current government. So therefore, clearly that will indicate to a certain candidate. So Sydney Riley has asked, what do the candidates think are the biggest failures of the current alliance-led government, and what would they do to rectify them?
Right. Accountability, transparency, the way that ministers have tended to abrogate their responsibility and have allowed consultants and unelected civil servants to make decisions on their behalf. They are They're elected to make decisions and to lead, and I don't believe that the previous government has done that. In fact, I sometimes wonder who the previous government has been governing for. They have presided over a cost of living increase. They've done nothing about that. They've done nothing about low pay, except when Reform Jersey has put forward propositions. So yes, they haven't done a particularly good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay.
Well, firstly, it wasn't an alliance-led government. In fact, the leader of our party wasn't even in the Assembly. And the alliance was only formed in the last 10 months of this government, so it really wasn't anything to do with that. Personally, I feel the biggest failure of this Assembly, or this government, whichever way you want to phrase it, has been communication. Because I think tremendous amount has been done, but the communication has not been got out there. And I think that's partly been a policy side that we haven't wanted to be confrontational. People sort of not wished to be confrontational. I'll give you an example. We had something in the JEP the other day where it said it's disgusting the way this government have squandered the rainy day, or strategic reserve fund as it's called. And someone said to me, "This is disgraceful you've done that." I said, "Do you want to know where that stands at the moment?" And he went, "Yes, I do." I said, "It stands at £1.1 billion. I said, "Do you know where the highest it's ever been?" And he went, "Nowhere." I said, £1.1 billion. But it wasn't put out there. We should have refuted that straight away.
Thank you very much. Philip.
I feel a little uncomfortable sitting as I do between two members of the Alliance Party. And I don't think I can allow Lindsay to get away with his disavowal of this being an alliance government. I think members of the Alliance Party form a majority of the government, and they do take responsibility actually for many of the actions which have taken place over the last 4 years. Surprisingly, I agree with my colleague from the Reform Party here, because I think that the lack of accountability is a really serious matter, which needs to be addressed in the next states. A lack of accountability results from the embracing of the changes brought about by a former chief executive, and I think they have been disastrous for democracy in the island. I really think that probably is the prime fault of the current government.
Thank you very much. Mark.
I like the sound of alliance-led government, but we don't have one. I am the leader of the party, as Lindsay Ash has said. It's not an alliance-led government now, and in doing our policies, we have not simply taken what the government has done. We've done an enormous amount of research. My observation, having read probably more government reports than any person in history should ever wish to read, is that they're pretty appalling. They're badly written, they're difficult to access, and it's partly communication, but it's more than that. I agree there's been far too much use of consultants. And rather than addressing issues head on, at times it seems that the mechanism, and it's not just the government, it's also the Assembly, is tortuous, taking a long time to do what people in business would do in a short time. We need more efficient government, taking decisions quickly. It doesn't mean taking them badly, but taking them quickly.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, I think we've heard words around here about communication, openness, transparency, and engagement. And I'm trying to be positive in politics in this campaign. So I'll try my best here. But I think we've seen a lack of some of those things. I think we've seen capital projects come forward where people feel like their voices aren't being heard, where a policy that might reach the Assembly is almost looking for a tick of a box rather than genuine consultation and feedback. And I'd far rather see us get to a place where policies and the direction and vision of the Assembly and the government are closer together, where scrutiny is that critical friend, where feedback is taken on openly and without an ego, and really listening to the groups in the community who have ideas. But I would say, on that positive note, I think you could say that the last government did a good job and a better job than others with COVID. And I don't want us to demonise all actions of one government in one bucket.
Thank you.
I
Barbara.
certainly feel since the introduction of ministerial UK-style government, it's become much more dictatorial and secretive, even with his own members in the Assembly. Certainly when I've spoken to some of the Assembly members, they're basically just told they have to vote this way, which really worries me. I'm used to in the past where we had committees that sat on, especially in health, where you had big committees where they can debate, they would ask more questions. And that's been replaced with scrutiny, which has a very good place. And I would like to see some blend of sort of ministerial committee type, looking after our big, like health and finance.
Thank you. Ken?
I answered it.
Oh, that's a question, sorry.
Sorry, I'm
very memorable, Ken.
I'm happy to have a read.
No,
I've got other things to say.
That's fine. Let's keep this fair. I'm sorry, but I should be going to Karen now. We have spoken to Karen. She's got a weak connection online, so we are going to keep trying her. For anybody that's just dialed in, the 7th candidate, Karen Wilson, isn't with us in the room, and she's trying to dial in, so that we will keep on trying. Okay, I'm going to move on to housing again now. We have touched on housing. I've got 2 questions related to it, which I'm going to lump together because they're kind of need to be really. Diamond Davis said, we hear the only answer to the housing problem is to build more housing, but what is affordable and how do the candidates propose to stop the current exodus of young people who simply cannot afford basic 1-bedroom flats advertised at over 350k? And there is a rental question that goes on the top of this. Now I can answer that at the same time, but you only have a minute. Shall I keep that separate? Let's answer that separate. So let's go for the how are we going to make housing affordable to people buying question first.
Well, what we have got, and you only have to look around St Helier now, there is a lot going on. There's Horizon coming off, there's the Colette low rise, there's around by the cinema, which I can't remember, Helier Park there. The Mayfair Hotel's been bought, the Limes. There's an awful lot of building going on. When those come on stream, that will be, I would guess, at least 1,000, possibly 2,000 homes coming to fruition. That just by itself will begin to bring prices down. But we also need to bring in schemes for first-time buyers because people want to own houses. We are doing that on some of the SOJDC with assisted buying schemes. And first-time buyer schemes, but we need to expand that. As I said on the other, I would like to see certain covenants put in place on certain properties where it can only be owner-occupier, so it can't be investment properties.
Yep.
The current very high prices of housing in Jersey are a consequence of an imbalance between supply and demand. That's a fundamental law of economics. If there are not enough houses around and more people wanting to buy them, the prices will go up. And the way of dealing with this very serious problem, I think, is to try to tackle the problem at both ends. Firstly, one has to try to reduce the demand. And the way to do that is through a migration or population policy which helps to avoid excessive immigration. And at the same time, increasing the supply by building more houses, and I think that, as Lindsay has said, is probably already happening. So far as affordability is concerned, I think that the only way to deal with that really is to increase the. I've got to stop.
You've got to stop. Increase the time to answer. Mark.
Philip's a lawyer, but that was an excellent economist's answer, which I agree with. The reason that prices are very high is that demand has exceeded supply. People have been able to pay the prices. And Jersey's not alone in this respect. You'll find exactly the same in many other jurisdictions. Interest rates are very low. So although house prices are high, actually mortgage repayments are lower than they've been in the past. The problem for many people is finding the deposit. So schemes that Andium run and JDC run can help first-time buyers. But we need to be careful here because if you give a lot of help to a lot of first-time buyers, the one guaranteed effect is that prices rise further. So you've got to calibrate these schemes to give the help to the people who most need it, but we've got to increase the supply. That is the only way, longer term, that housing is going to be more affordable in Jersey.
Thank you. Alex?
Well, I think you start by looking at the market and asking what you want it to be. And I think you've got to start by saying homes are places to live and not just investments. You need to look at large swathes of buy-to-let landlords and whether they are good actors on the housing market or bad actors. And then I think you've got to look at the supply-demand imbalance, which I don't think is going to be solved just by building more. And what's not being asked enough is, are we building the right accommodation? The current kind of breakdown of most large developments, 50 plus, would have you see about 70% one beds, 20% two beds, and if you're lucky, a three bed thrown in. So what we've actually got is a double whammy. Prices are higher, and for an average lower square footage property, what we need to do is, when we are building more, we need to build the correct distribution of beds in homes to make sure people can stay in their homes and take out the overheating of people trying to have a home for a family.
Thank you. Barbara?
When I came to Jersey in 1979, I was on a work permit and I bought share transfer flat, but you had to be an owner-occupier. What has happened over the years is that we've had flats going up and you've got outside investors. It was actively advertised in the UK to come and buy properties in Jersey, and these are your landlord owners that live off island. That has got to stop. That is what's created the escalation and the rising prices, preventing young people to get on that ladder to have a 2 or 1 bedroom flat. And that, I think the state should be ashamed of what they've allowed that to happen.
Thank you. Ken?
So a roof over one's head, I believe, is a human right. And the distribution of properties that are new builds is completely wrong. As I said earlier, out of 100 buildings, brand new buildings, only 15 of those are designated for affordable housing and first-time buyers, and that is just quite wrong. It needs to be at least 50-50, perhaps even more. So the supply of affordable housing will help to bring down prices. We need to close the loophole where foreign investors can come to the island and buy as many properties as they think, 5 or 10. They can either leave those properties lying fallow, keep them for 5 years, and because we've got no capital gains tax, then just take the profit. Let's not forget that any rental from those properties will disappear out the island as well. Okay. The states can do more and must.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Okay, so I am going to merge two questions together now because I think it's quite relevant. So Lee Carpenter has asked, considering high rents are a significant part of both the housing and cost of living crises, what is your stance on regulating landlords to protect people from higher than inflation rent rises? But first, I want you to answer Diamond Dave's question. Are any of the candidates landlords? So I think you should. I think it's quite pertinent to declare now if you're a landlord, and then answer Lee Carpenter's question about whether you think that there should be regulation for landlords to protect people from higher than inflation rent rises. So that's first to Philip.
Yes, I am a landlord. I think the questioner will find in the manifesto of the JLC a commitment to introduce a landlord's register. We think a landlord's register is important for a number of reasons, but firstly it will give the government information about tenancies and about rents which are being charged. At the moment, there is a lot of information about rents which is based upon guesswork in effect, because we don't in fact have any means of finding out exactly what rents are. As to controlling rents, we've tried that before, and I'm not sure that it was a great success. We have a rent control tribunal, and tenants can use that, but I'm not sure it's been very successful in the past.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mark.
No, I'm not a landlord. There is already some protection for tenants. Low-income tenants can have income support to help meet their rental payments. So of Antium tenants, for example, a third have all of their rent met and another third have part of their rent met. But there are many people who don't have any of their rent met by income support. Again, the solution there is actually more housing. If there is more housing, rents will be lower. It is the shortage that causes rents to be where they are. And the risk of having rent controls, and it's evidenced in many countries around the world, if you force a landlord to charge less than he or she would like to, some of them will say, we won't let out the property. And what's happened in other countries is that they become dilapidated. So let's get a solution that works, build more housing, and that will help rents come down.
Thank you, Alex.
I have a share in the company that owns the flat that I live in, and there is a flat below, which created me a half landlord, I think then. And when we were, letting that out, I was very, keen to make sure that it was fair. I was very pleased to see really good uptake on social media when I advertised it, which was really sad that you're advertising and you're seeing people going a good price, and it makes you think maybe we need to look at how does the market work for rentals. But I'm not convinced that I've seen an approach that would fit Jersey yet. But I'd be very open to seeing mechanisms that make it fair for renters. And then I think we've heard mention of licensing and making sure. I'm in favour of registrations, and I think we've got digital solutions that won't create administration in the government, but will actually be using technology and photos and anonymity to protect renters better than at the moment.
Hi, I'm not a landlady, and I think having a registration, you've got to know what your facts are first before you start bringing in things. It's all very well knee-jerk and says, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. You need to know what the range of these rents are in the categories. But I think you've got to also, because of outside investors, they want money, a good return. So we need to look at that very seriously.
Thank you. Ken.
So I'm not a landlord, and I believe the question was about landlords increasing rents by more than the cost of inflation. The proposition was brought to the States by Reform Jersey on specifically that issue. It was voted down by 28 members of the Assembly. It was sad to know that both St Clement deputies voted against the proposition. I'm in favour of landlords declaring what kind of property it is. It needs to be fit for purpose. The only way we can ensure that is through regular inspection of the properties. There should be a landlord's register. If it's good enough for someone to live in, then it needs to be on the register. If it isn't, it shouldn't be.
Thank you. And Lindsay.
I'm not a landlord. I'm not even a property owner in Jersey. I'm not in favour of rent ceilings, if you like, to that expression. They have consistently failed wherever they've been used in the world. As far as voting against the tempo reform in the States, it was a very badly worded proposition, and what it would have done would have prevented any landlord from really improving their property. Because if they say they wanted to put new bathrooms, new showers, do the whole thing up, they would not have been allowed to put the rent up. It would have to have stayed at the same rent that was being charged previously. And that is really counterproductive on decent rental properties. So if someone was going to bring something, it really needs to be better put than that, because it's dangerous when you move that way. Or you've had someone in there for 20 years, you've been good, you've kept the rate there, they've moved out, you're still going to charge the same rent you've kept with someone because they were elderly? No.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to remind you that if you want to ask a question, please do. I'm going to try and get some different people asking questions. So I've got Alan O'Kelly next. Alan said he voted for reform last time, so he wanted change, and they went into power of the outgoing government. To all candidates, are there any parties you would absolutely not share power with, or would you all support one another if needed? He doesn't finish his question, so we'll end on that. So that first goes to Mark.
Thank you for that. Look, the electorate decides who's going to govern Jersey. That's the reality. Now, naturally, I hope that the Jersey Alliance will do very well. You know, we have got candidates in every constituency, and we'll look at the percentage of people who voted for us and who voted for other parties. And if we were in the driving seat, if I can put it like that, because we've done well, we would talk with the like-minded people, whether they're independents or in other parties. So I'm not going to say, you know, we wouldn't deal with anybody. I have to say, having read Reform's manifesto, in terms of what Reform wants to do, we're not far apart. Our big difference is how we would do it. And we think we've got the experienced group of people who can make it happen. But I think there's many independent candidates who I've met and heard from already who would be delighted to work with in government.
Thank you, Alex.
I am, as you heard at the beginning, an independent candidate. I'm also a member of Better Way, which is a coalition, collective, I should say, of independents who are saying we want transparency in the way people work together, but we do want to work together from day one, and we won't be doing backroom deals. I don't think any party can field a majority because no party has a majority of even kind of candidates. What I want to see is people from all parties who get in, working better together. Where there was an open manifesto launch night, as Ken will know, I attended, not to tear up what I disliked in their manifesto, but to find what on day one I could agree with and how we can actually work together from day one, more productively and without point scoring. That is what I'm a little worried about.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm independent and my party is St Clement. But I think when you look at the manifestos, we look at all as individuals, even if within this room, there's more commonality rather than differences between us. So at the end of the day, it's about the person who, if we're elected, is about the person who has the right strengths, the right background, the right information to actually share with the government, because it's about what is right for our parishioners, for the island at the end of the day. It's not about, it should not be about personalities, about scoring points. Absolutely not. It's about putting things right.
Thank you.
So, well, just to pick up on Mark's point, Reform Jersey will work with like-minded people. Depending on the balance of power within the assembly, I would expect us to be able to work with certainly some people around this room who have got similar values. The values of Reform Jersey is one of fairness for everybody, and providing independents, members of other parties have similar goals and aspirations, then we will seek to form consensus. Thank you.
Lindsay.
Well, obviously, I've been in there. I'd love to say it would be great for all 49 people to live happily ever after. It really doesn't work like that. When you sit in there, it becomes rather like the Big Brother house, actually. And so it's slightly different. But certainly, I have no problem with Reform. They've always been very honest with me. I get on well with Sam, Monty. I found one of the most amusing people in there. So yeah, I have no problem with them. And if we were in a position where we were trying to form Council of Ministers, I would have no problem with many of them. Rob Ward's a very capable guy, Karine is brilliant. So I think we would have to look at who we can work with if and when that situation arose.
I don't say this in any way against independents, because I quite understand why some of them should have taken that stance. But the great advantage of political parties is that you do know what you're voting for. Each political party does have a manifesto which sets out in detail what their policies are and what they would do if they were in government. To answer the question more specifically, I think the JLC would find it difficult, I'm sorry to say, to work with the Reform Party, because there are some things in the Reform Party's manifesto with which we simply disagree, and they are quite fundamental, particularly in relation to tax. But as to the rest, we would certainly work with anybody who aligned himself or herself with the values set out in the manifesto of the JLC.
Thank you very much. So we're halfway through now. Thank you everybody for all your questions. You can keep asking questions. I've got quite a few still to go through. which you'll be pleased to hear. And I'm going to slightly change tack here because we haven't had one about this. So Andy Brown's question is next. Andy says that under Charlie Parker reforms, civil service headcount has increased by 15%, including many from the UK. With reforms now abandoned, is it now time to send those civil servants back to the UK and have a root and branch review of spending across the civil service? So, Alex, that one feels to you first.
Nice long question. Well, I mean, I don't think you can ask anyone to pack their bags and say there's a boat in the morning. I think everyone needs treating with dignity for whatever reason we brought them in. But we do need to reform the expenditure of whatever the next government looks like. And we need to make sure that when we are reforming that structure, importance is given on what is most suitable for a given role, what is most suitable for the size and shape of Jersey, not what might be considered best. And the difference between the best might be the highest qualification or the greatest number of companies. The most suitable might be someone who knows how to work and who actually understands how things work in an open and progressive and not kind of archaic way. But we do need to reform, and we will hopefully see through that fewer people strategizing through, fewer people making large, broad policies, and more people under small leadership doing great work for the island.
Thank you, Barbara.
I have been aghast by Charlie Parker. He may have had some good ideas, but why, we moved out of Cyril Markham House, it's now flattened. We're going to spend £1 million or whatever it is on Broad Street. He brings in numerous people from his own area, when we have got such a wealth of expertise locally. It's very rude, I think, to be dismissing people who are living and working and paying their taxes here in Jersey and have invested, that they have been overlooked for people just being brought in because of his friends. It just astounds me. So yes, I'll be looking at those jobs very closely, the ones that have come in, and look at what wealth we have here locally.
Thank you. Ken?
We have the ridiculous situation where a lady, an outside consultant in health, has earned 300,000 pounds over 3 years. Nobody seems to know why she was employed, and more importantly, nobody knows what she does. So the civil service, the directors general who head up the departments, need to have a good look at the people that they employ. We need to minimize the number of consultants that we have. Alex is right, we can't ask them to leave first thing tomorrow morning. What I would ask them to do, though, is to have some succession planning, so that when the consultant leaves, they leave behind somebody with local qualifications who is able to take over that role.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Thank you. I feel very sorry for the civil servants, I've got to say, because they're very much maligned. Yes, there are one or two consultants where things haven't gone right, but the majority of civil servants do an excellent job, really, really good job, and they're thoroughly professional people, and I've been delighted to work with many of them in the Treasury Department. Ken makes a great point. We do need to develop, if you put it in football parlance, a youth policy, where we bring our own people through. And I think, in fairness, the civil service is really trying to do that now. They are trying to fast track people and put them on a path. The new DG of the Home Affairs, it's a local person, local lady, and it's great to see that. And we need more of it, but it doesn't happen overnight. It needs to be done in a thorough way and make sure the right people are there. You do not want people sitting there who are not suitable for a job, because it's not fair on them, it's not fair on the island.
Thank you. Philip?
I don't think we should be focusing on individuals, and I'm not going to do that. But it is true that during the last 4 years, the headcount of the civil service has increased considerably. I think it's gone up by 800, if my figures are correct. And that is an increase in the public service, which is completely unsustainable. We have to certainly stop expanding the civil service, and indeed do take some steps to reduce it, because otherwise the island will suffocate itself upon its own bureaucracy. I agree with what's been said about greater efforts being made to increase the employability of young Jersey people and people who have been resident in the island for a long time, and making them fit for appointment to higher posts.
Thank you very much. And Mark?
I want to agree with much of what's been said, going back a long time to what Alex said. I'm certainly not demonising civil servants. I've worked with a number over many years. I think there's some really dedicated civil servants who do a good job. And remember, they can't answer back. All the criticism they get, they are not able to reply. If civil servants are doing things politicians don't like, it's up to the politicians to stop them. As in respect of employing large numbers of people, my criticism is far more about large numbers of consultants. And that doesn't mean somebody doing a permanent job as a consultant. It means bringing in people to do an exercise that should be done in-house by officials. And I think there are officials well able to do that sort of work. Where I agree entirely with Alex, there's far too many people writing long discursive strategies and not nearly enough implementing them.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a reminder for everybody at home that Karen Wilson isn't with us. She is a candidate for deputy for St Clement, but she's been unable to join us. She was hoping to join us remotely, but hasn't been able to do so. Okay, the next question is from Jill Bartholomew, who she's a resident of St Clement for less than 2 months, but she's keen to learn about the politics of the parish. She has received, oh, that's just disappeared again. She's received a sorry, I will praise you what she said anyway, because it's directed at certain candidates. She's received a manifesto, but what she would like to know is, are people going to go around to houses? Sorry, I'm having to praise you this because it's suddenly disappeared. Here we go. Are people going to be visiting the electorate, many of whom are elderly and able to access online meetings such as this one, or attend the in-person meetings at the parish hall? So how are you going to deal with your campaigns effectively, and are you going to engage with people in the parish, is the question.
Right. I've already started with that, and in fact some of the, on my Facebook page, there's some of my parishioners have actually contacted me. They find difficulty in getting out, so I've actually spoken to them on the phone and have been round to see them. Or that they've had when we've met up in the parish hall, we had facilities that they could be picked up and transported to the parish hall. St Clement does run an extremely good service, voluntary service, that's to be applauded, and that can be built on. But yes, we are out there knocking on doors, and will be, and certainly until voting day on the 22nd of June.
Thank you, Ken.
So there's an old adage which says that people buy from people. And I think voters will vote for people who take the trouble to knock on their door, to find out what their concerns are, and to try and explain what the policies they intend pursuing should they be elected. I've already, myself and some helpers, have delivered over 2,500 individual leaflets through the doors of St Clement's. And once my duties of sitting in front of this owl are completed, I shall be knocking on doors and finding out what the concerns of the parishioners are, to see how we can help. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I will definitely be going around. I've already started. It's one I find it one of the most enjoyable bits of being a politician, and the bit that I always find out and find fascinating is that behind every front door is the real life going on. Someone's cooking a meal, you've got the children to worry about, and you tend to look at someone as a voter or someone you knew in the office, but when you see behind doors, there's actual lives going on. As far as visiting Jill, I will want to. She has said on Twitter she wants to throw a bucket of water at me. So I may well wear a pair of swimming trunks when I go around there, which will be a sight to behold.
Well, I'm not terribly good at social media, but if residents of St Clement's are prepared to use old-fashioned things like the telephone and the email, I'm perfectly prepared to answer any questions so far as I can. Yes, of course, I shall be knocking on doors and sending out leaflets, as indeed I'm sure every other candidate will be doing.
I spent today ringing bells rather than knocking on doors, and I'm now best friends with about 25 dogs. And it's interesting, but frankly, most people were not in, and indeed, nor do you expect them to be in, but you're hoping a fair number will be. So I was able to have some great chats with some people and just left a card saying, sorry, you're out. We're all trying to get round, but it is actually physically impossible to do every single house and meet every single voter much as we would like to. But it's an essential part of campaigning. Like Lindsay, I enjoy the feedback, and you get some people who are less than friendly, but actually very few. It's been really rewarding today.
Okay, Alex?
Well, whilst getting dogs, I'm getting cups of tea offered to me, as I'm sure others are. So I'm worried that I'm going to have a caffeine addiction by the end of by 22nd of June. I've been, I think like everyone it sounds, going around making sure I'm talking to the parishioners. Being invited into their homes has been lovely for people to say, come sit down, talk, have a cup of tea. But I think it goes more than that. So everyone is getting a letter from me, delivered by me and some supporters. I will be around the parish. But if I get in, I will be around the parish on the 23rd of June and the 24th, and for the next 4 years, because I believe the deputy's job is to serve the parish. And it's not just about that seat in the States Assembly, but it's about balancing interests of being approachable and ready to support parishioners as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of industry-specific questions now from people. Max Reneth has asked, as a States member, what will you do to support farmers who are currently struggling to maintain their businesses? And that goes first to Ken.
We're sitting in the digital hub, and I had a meeting with Tony Moretta, the CEO, a few weeks ago, and learned that they are in contact with agriculture, using drones and digital technology to make agriculture more efficient, to help with delivering the fertilizers at the right time and in the right quantity. But a lot of agriculture depends upon people, and unless we can address two main issues, that is the population and the housing problems, then attracting people to work on the fields is going to be difficult, which is why, as part of our manifesto, we have a housing action plan, and we also have a population plan.
Thank you very much, Lindsay.
I agree with Ken, and yeah, I too have spoken to Tony, and I think there are digital things that can be done in agriculture that will help. And I think we're going to have to, when you look at what's going on now in Ukraine, there seems to be a grain shortage on its way, and it may well be the UK are now looking at genetically modified crops. I'm not saying we should go that way, but technology has got to start to play a part in increasing productivity, and it's vital for Jersey. Jersey's always produced great agricultural produce, and we had tomatoes, we've got Jersey Royals, got milk, which again we send overseas to Kenya. So I really hope we can. I think finding suitable accommodation for seasonal workers generally, not just agricultural but hospitality, is a big issue. Roland Tulin tried to bring something, it didn't work, but it's something we're going to have to go back and just find something that we can do to help in that sphere.
Philip.
When I've talked to representatives of the Jersey Farmers Union, I've found, generally speaking, a great deal of positivity and optimism. I have learned a great deal from them about the digital things, the robotics in particular, which are coming into use in the agricultural industry, and that seems to be an extremely good way, certainly in some parts of the industry, to get around the problems of finding sufficient staff to work in the fields. I think the most worrying thing that I learned was that the numbers of people in the industry have shrunk over the last 20 years from 300 down to about 30 or 40. And that is certainly worrying for the future.
Thank you. Mark?
Well, farming is one of the great traditions of Jersey, and going back over 100 years, Jersey was in the forefront of agricultural science. I agree entirely on the points on technology. Indeed, I went to visit a large dairy farm and saw robots doing things. I really don't want to say what they were doing, but I can tell you it was incredibly efficient, and it led to much better results for the farmer and a lower cost and the need to employ fewer people. So we've got a great digital Jersey. We've got a great agriculture industry. We need to put the two together, and we know that's happening. Let's see what more we can do.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, just to address the technology, one I'm very proud of, have built machine learning models to improve tea harvesting in Kenya, both for the quality and quantity and sustainability. But the question for Jersey also has to be as, who is our farmers? We've gone from the 1950s with 1,000 farms to 50. We've gone down to 9 or 14 dairy farms. We've got to ask, what do we want from a farming industry? I'd love to farm things, but I think you'll find it is almost impossible for new entrants to enter farming. And succession planning, to come back to that, and youth planning, we need to make sure that our agricultural building stock stays in agriculture, that we have valid opportunities for new entrants to become smallholders, to become bona fide. And that might also involve looking at the protection of transfer of controlled agricultural land, so that we move from the 80% of tenanted land, which has now come, to actually greater owner-occupied use of land that will be more resilient for a future farming economy.
Thank you. Barbara.
For 10 years, I sat on the Employment Forum, and we always looked at the farming industry and the hospitality. And when we were talking, the farmers actually used to come and give a presentation. The farmers in Jersey cannot sell their products on an even keel. They get a subsidy here of between 4 and 7%. In the UK, the subsidies are much, much higher. So they're not competing on a level playing field. Because of global markets and the big supermarkets who are driving the price of the products down, it's so hard for our Jersey farmers to actually compete and to be able to get a good profit from selling their products abroad. They have reached their limit just about on mechanisation, because that's why a lot of the local produce is now being stopped, because it's just so expensive.
Okay, thank you very much. We've touched on some of the issues, which will come up in this next question. Martin's asking about tourism. He said it's bringing in over 250 million in spend annually. How are you going to help an industry which has suffered hugely over the last few years gain its feet again with regard to employment issues, accommodation and support? First goes to Lindsay. Yes.
I mean, I think first of all, we have to accept that tourism will not go back to the golden days of 1970s. It's just not going to happen. People now go to Spain, they go to Thailand, they go all over the world. So those days aren't going to happen. I do think we can look more towards weekend breaks. I think what we're seeing a lot of good improvements with is the sport tourism. The rugby club bring in a considerable amount of people during the winter to come and visit, which is great. And funnily enough, you talk to people, they come back in the summer as well because they like it, and they'd rather like to see it when the sun's shining rather than when people are knee-deep in mud rolling around at St Peter's. So we need to try to keep the hotels we've got. We need to make an effort. But some of the hotels, when people say, oh, we should have said that, we're not fit for 2020. They just weren't. And if you can't make them pay, they can't be. But it's nice to see people like Premier Inn coming, and hopefully we can do something up at Fort Regent with a conference hotel offering. I think there are a lot of possibilities still with tourism.
Thank you. Philip.
A few days ago, I spent an interesting hour or so, it might have been longer, talking to representatives of the Jersey Hospitality Association, who invited all the candidates to come and talk to them, and received a number of interesting ideas and suggestions from them. I agree with what's already been said in terms of the unlikelihood of getting the tourism industry back to the state in which it was 20 or 30 years ago. But I think we must do what we can to encourage them and to help them in terms of helping the season to expand into the shoulder months, and doing what we can to help them in terms of licensing arrangements. One of the things they were particularly keen to ask was that the licensing period should be extended.
Thank you.
My first ever job was working in a cafe in Simple Arts a very long time ago, when tourism was at its peak, and of course it's never going to go back to that. I'm a huge fan of event tourism. Lindsay's talked a bit about sport. We know one rugby club came over with 1,500 supporters, and they don't just come for the day, they come for some time. I think the same with cultural events. The Jersey Festival of Words, I know, brings in a lot of people who will stay not just for a couple of days, but for a week or longer, spend money in the island, restaurants, hotels, taxis, and as Lindsay said, if they like it, they come back. So I think we need to expand event tourism, and we need to help the industry with the labour issues. This point about the licence has been made, and I think well made. They're struggling for staff. Really, with any industry, you'd ask them, what is it you need from government? And then, can government deliver it? So it's engagement with the industry. What do they really want? How can we help them?
Thank you. Alex?
Well, we've got the optimism side, and we've got some of the risks. We've got the staff accommodation, which hotels typically might have provided. We've got the suitability of hotels, which I'd like to see our key prime sites retaining. Maybe not the old prime sites policy, but something that really makes sure we have destinations that can be invested in. And then we hear about experiential tourism. But I haven't seen a policy written by a government department that details a small but actionable way one could test the water. We could say, actually, I was in Italy for the one holiday, I've done it too long, and everywhere said agritourism. And you go, we've got a challenge about farmers, right? We've got people saying, I need to diversify my business, or farming stuff like that. What do I have? I have land. What am I? I'm a custodian of the land. What am I? I'm a producer on the land. Well, if we convert our mentality from sometimes boxing people and preventing opportunities, good actors in the system should be able to explore diversifying their businesses. And agritourism, for one, would be an example.
Okay, thank you very much. Barbara?
In 2015, we had the Island Games. Wow, wow, wow. It was just like going back to how tourism used to be. And this is a good example of when you're bringing sport, hotels, restaurants, every part of Jersey was just lit up, and we have to do more because that will help everybody. It's not just the hotels, it was everything to do in town. It was wonderful. So it's building on something like that. We should be flying the flag and get the Island Games back here again, and other big events. Accommodation, it's difficult because if some hotels used to have their own houses, the housing, so I don't know where that's gone. I mean, whether it wasn't sustainable, I don't know. Let's hear what the tourism people want and see if we can work with them.
Okay, thank you, Ken.
I would like to pick up on a point that Alex made, and that is the fact that we haven't had a policy delivered by government. So what I would like to see is for the next assembly to bring in the leaders of tourism and to ask them exactly what it is that they want. What are their concerns? What's the stumbling blocks to growth? And then to form policies around that. Cost of retaining staff is clearly an issue. The cost of housing staff is another issue. The cost of doing business. So unless we know exactly what it is that are going to be the key drivers for the industry, then it's really difficult to come up with any sensible suggestions. So consultation first, policy next.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got just over half an hour left. You can still leave your questions. I'm trying to be fair with the questions and get around as many different people as possible, so I'm not up necessarily asking the same question, same people's questions. E. Roberts has asked one slightly different. How do you plan to take forward the homelessness strategy, and which of the 8 action points do you feel is most pressing? That goes to Philip.
In the manifesto of the JLC, we commit to seeking to implement all the 8 recommendations of the Homelessness Board. Now, which is the most serious one, most important one of those? I'm grasping to remember what the 8 recommendations were. But I think that the establishment of a body to help those, to have a first port of call for those who are in desperate straits, would probably be the most important one for me.
Thank you. Mark?
I commend the report. I thought of all the reports I've seen done by or for government, that was one of the best, written entirely by local people. The chair was, I believe, from the finance industry, and yet the charities were all involved. The recommendations are not, let's spend lots of money. It was about doing practical things. I think all 8 recommendations hang together. I believe Reform, Jersey Alliance, Jersey Liberal Conservatives, and Progress are united on full implementation. They do hang together, but I think it's a multi-agency approach. People aren't homeless because they haven't got a home. They're homeless for a multitude of reasons, often to do with health and with various problems they've got. It won't work simply by dealing with housing. Multi-agency approach is necessary.
Thank you, Alex.
I've got a simple answer for this one. I've not read the report yet. And I'm not going to spend my 1 minute telling you that I have or trying to make it sound like I have. Sounds like a lot of people have done their homework. I will be doing my homework on that one. If E. Roberts wants to reach out and talk through what they see as a concern or the opportunities in that, or things we can do to do more in the next assembly beyond what the scope of that report is, I'm listening. But I think it's key to remember that actually the people who represent you will all have their own skill sets, and they will bring things, and having a listening ear to those who, as Barbara said earlier, are the right people for the right job with the right mentality is as important.
Thank you, Barbara.
Having worked in mental health for a number of years, we've worked with people who are homeless, again, not necessarily through it might be breakable relationship, and we have tried to offer people accommodation, and some people don't like it. I mean, we cannot meet everybody's needs. Some people actually don't want to have some of that accommodation. However, it's about getting people back into society. I was appalled that the lines had been flattened. Absolutely appalled. I know it's going to go into housing, but because we need to be helping people now, and actually to be, is it maybe as a men's shelter or something like that, where because relationships break up, and they need that help to get them back on into society again.
Thank you, Ken.
Yes, I mean, Reform Jersey, along with the other parties that have been mentioned, is fully committed to implementing all of the 8 points raised in the report. That's one of our pledges. And again, a multi-agency approach is one that's the best fit, as someone's already said. People don't become homeless out of choice. They become homeless because of many other factors, whether it's mental illness, whether it's the breakup of a relationship, the loss of a job. There are many factors that need to be taken into account. So a multi-agency approach, and Reform Jersey will implement all of the 8 recommendations of the report.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you. I agree basically what we've all said here, that homelessness does not come about purely because of lack of homes. It comes from a myriad of reasons. It could be alcoholism, it could be mental health, drug addiction. Yeah, there's a tremendous field there. One of the things that I think, and I'll praise Reform for this, they have worked very closely with Caritas. And I'd like to say, I think Caritas do tremendous work in that area where it really does suffer, as in central St Helier. And I know Mark went to see the Catholic leader and spoke to him about the problems. And I think we need to do more of that, talk to the community leaders in those areas to really dig down into where the problems are and how they happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Julian Cousins is next. He says he works in health and social services and they have hundreds of unfilled vacancies. How are we going to get people to come to the island and work when they keep on saying that the cost of housing no longer makes Jersey financially viable? This also goes for other industries. I know we've touched on housing, but this is a particular problem to fill unfilled vacancies for key staff. So it goes to Mark first, isn't it, this time around?
I wish there was a simple answer. This problem is not unique to Jersey. You'll find exactly the same points being made in England, Scotland, Wales, and many other countries. So I wish I could say, you know, here's a magic button we can press and it would happen. Yeah, we do need to bring people in, but also we need to look at, are there any changes we can make that will make it more attractive for people in Jersey who currently are not working, but who might be attracted to work part-time. I don't know if are there any tax changes, social security changes that can encourage people perhaps to work 15, 20 hours a week when they might not want to do a full-time job. But if we don't do that, relying on bringing people in all the time, when we've all got concerns about population, it's not going to work. So let's try and get as many local people in the market as we can to help.
Alex?
Well, I think, as Mark says, it's not just going to be about the cost of housing, it's going to be the availability of skill, and that's affecting more industries than just health and social services. When it comes to housing, we can look at the hospital, which has approval, and you look at a rather large site with a rather large campus and with no key workers accommodation in that campus. And we could have had, were there any decisions we could be making there or on any other key sites? And I think when we look at skill and motivation on the island, we've got to come back to saying, is the island an affordable place for someone to have a quality of life, regardless of the key industry or the industry they work in? Whether that be health or social services, whether that be a trade or vocational job or one in finance. And if until we address that in a quality perspective, we will have that conversation across every industry.
Thank you, Barbara.
Health and social services has had accommodation in the past, and it would allow staff, well, when they brought staff over, that they would have that accommodation. And a lot of, at that time, that staff could actually stay in that accommodation. Then they brought in that you could only stay there for 6 months and then you'd have to move out. And then, of course, this is when it happens, is that you start hitting the high rates. And, of course, that they can't, and they have to leave. What is disgraceful is the fact that the Westaway Court has been lying empty for the past 2 or 3 years, has had no money spent on it, but they've spent money on taking accommodation out of the local market, Convent Court, Hugh Court, and spending money on that instead of spending money on its own accommodation, which is there. It's and you wonder why that staff, you know, don't stay.
Thank you, Ken.
It's a multitude of factors, but it's the cost of living here in Jersey. Housing, we've already touched on, is very expensive. The rental accommodation is also extremely expensive. The states need to do more by releasing its own land for redevelopment, brownfield sites in town. The cost of living crisis, the government has done nothing about that. We propose removing GST on food, which will give everybody a 5% uplift. But growing our own is paramount. Vocational training needs to be far more important in the educational system and not just concentrate on jobs in the finance industry.
Thank you. Lindsay.
In fairness, Hugh Court has been revamped for doctors' accommodation and the medical profession, and they've done a great job. You go around there, fabulous flats for people. So I think that's a good step in the right direction. One of the things I'm very keen on, and it just hasn't come about, and I'm surprised actually Reform are pushing this as well, is early years nursery care. Because if we can get much more affordable, one of the reasons so many women cannot go to work or afford to go back to work is because of the cost of putting a child into nursery. And really, we need to look at that because it could free up so many people that would want to go back to work. It's just not financially viable for them at the moment. So I'd like to see that looked at.
Thank you. And Philip.
I don't think that there is a silver bullet either, and I'm not going to repeat what others have already said. I perhaps would just emphasise that I think the government could do more to provide accommodation for those people who come into the island where we don't have the skills here. And I'm thinking particularly of what used to be called the children's service, where children in care quite often find that they have 5 or 6 different people responsible for them over a period of a year, which is a completely deplorable state of affairs. And one of the reasons for that is that there is no accommodation where these people can go.
Okay, thank you. Most of you, well, some of you have touched on it, so I'm going to ask Claire Taylor's question now, which is the one of the day, I suppose. Do you agree with the decision on the location of the hospital, and do you think it will provide value for money?
Well, I know there's a lady to the left of me who have a lot to say. I don't think it was. I think Jersey should have solutions to Jersey problems over the size and scale that are appropriate. And having seen the mock-ups and the visualizations and studied the plans at a design level, I don't think it does Jersey credit. Strong statement. But it is approved, and we need to see if the Assembly will be making further comment on is it from a business case perspective or whether that is a done deal. And I will wait to see what the new Assembly forms and what happens with the CEO. Is it suitable? I think Barbara did a great job at the inquiry, really asking the questions that needed to be asked around beds around kind of the actual provision of services, but it was a key case of earlier and true engagement with islanders probably would have resulted in a less problematic conclusion.
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
Right, I need to keep this short. I don't agree with the acute facility, and I emphasise acute facility up at on Westmount, because they will be demolishing Samaray Ward, the Children's Development Service, Memory Clinic, and the Speech and Language. These are fit for purpose buildings and rehabilitation buildings. There is nothing in the pipeline to build a bespoke rehabilitation centre, which I think is disgraceful, because it's all well going to have your operation, but it's about your rehabilitation that gets you really well when they go back into the community. We need rehabilitation, and that is, this new hospital is not going to deliver that. It's also going to be less 24/7 beds. If you just get the plans and count them, you will see how many beds there are. Do not go down the road of trolleys and chair beds and day surgery. It's 24/7 beds.
Okay, done it in time. Thank you, Ken.
She's made some good points. I'll acknowledge that. However, the decision has been made, and I think for us to revisit the location of the hospital would cost us even more money. And actually, the location has been used as a bit of a red herring. It's the delivery of the services that we need to think about now. Reform Jersey has got the Assembly to agree that the build budget will be 350 million. The remainder of the 800 million will be used to develop and deliver services. The one concern that Reform Jersey has is to ensure that those services are free at the point of delivery, and that we don't have any user pays taxes being stealthily pushed in. So free at the point of delivery.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay.
Right. Would it have been my favourite choice? No, my favourite choice would have been People's Park back in 2012, and we'd have a hospital, and we would have saved ourselves millions. But we didn't do that. And I think it was Einstein, I might be wrong, but he said to go round and round and round doing the same thing and looking for a different result is the definition of insanity. And if we pull out now, we will go round and round, we'll find another site that half the island won't agree on. And we've got to draw a line under it now. We've got to get on, we've got to provide a proper hospital, because the one at the moment, and I've spoken to loads of the consultants in there, it's not fit for purpose and it's fast becoming dangerous.
Thank you, Philip.
My answers to the two questions are no and no. I don't think it's the right place for a hospital to put a huge building of this scale on top of a hill. I think it's not right. And so far as value for money is concerned, I really struggle to find that £800 million for a hospital is value for money. What to do about it, of course, is a much more difficult question, because we have gone a long way down the road of building the hospital at Overdale, and whether it's practical or economically sensible to change course at this stage, I simply don't know. I want to reserve my judgment until I know more about it.
Thank you. Mark.
It's been a very unhappy story. It was in 2012 that the States Assembly said we need a new hospital by 2020. And as Lindsay has said, a lot of money is now being spent, in a way wasted, in keeping the building going for a few years. The States Assembly voted overwhelmingly for the Overdale project and the money, and the planning inspector recommended approval, and the planning minister has approved it. Now, if we go back, it's going to cost millions more. So whether it was the right or wrong decision, you can debate endlessly. And in Jersey, people love doing that. But the reality is, let's get on with it. Because if we try and revisit that decision, we're talking 2030 and even more money. So I agree entirely with Ken on this. Let's get on with it now. Jersey needs a proper hospital.
Okay, moving swiftly on, because we're running out of time. Nathan's asked, given the challenges of Brexit, worker shortages, and the recent debacle around granting of visas to Ukrainians, do candidates feel it's time that Jersey pursued its own immigration law distinct from the UK's, much like Gibraltar has done? The Republic of Ireland have done this, whilst also continuing to participate in the common travel area. Barbara, that's your sorry about that.
It's interesting when we time passed, when you talk about housing qualifications, when people come in, and about time limits, there was always that about human rights. So you can't be restricting people. They've actually invested so many years. Maybe the time is right to actually look at, like what other countries are doing, that we do start restricting and looking at a visa type. Maybe the time is right for that. It certainly wasn't some years ago. There was a lot of anger, and it was very polarised. Let's have a look. We'll see what the implications would be.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Ken.
So if I've understood the question correctly, it's about new policies to evaluate whether or not we should allow a particular person to come into the island. Reform Jersey has put forward a proposal whereby when a license is granted, currently it's the employer who holds on to that license, not the employee. That means that the employee is stuck with that employer. We would like to see a much fairer points-based system to bring people into the island for essential services. But we would like to see the license being held by the employee, so that the employee cannot be exploited by the employer.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I think Ken makes quite a good point there. I mean, I've always probably favoured the green card system, and which the Americans used to use. I think the Australians use something similar. But that was probably going back in the days when we had a problem with too many people coming in. I think at the moment it's slightly changed, and we can't attract workers to come here, which we've already discussed. Shortages in hospitality, shortages in agriculture, and property prices putting people off. So it's quite a complicated thing. I know Roland Turin did a long piece on population and immigration. I think it's a start. Certainly it was very interesting when we had the census, wasn't it? Everyone was going, oh, this is going to be 130, 135. That was 103. So we're not as perhaps as overpopulated as we previously thought.
Thank you, Philip.
I think the question was whether we should have our own domestic immigration law, because at the moment, of course, we have the UK's Immigration Act extended to Jersey, and that contains a number of constraints for us. amongst other things. For example, we are not allowed to allow French citizens to come to Jersey without showing a passport. And many French citizens don't have passports. They have identity cards. And in the past, that has been sufficient to allow them to come into Jersey. So my answer is yes. I think we should be looking very seriously to having our own immigration law in order to develop slightly greater freedom to do what we want to do so far as foreign nationals are concerned.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, population policy is my hobby. Very sad, I know. First of all, we do have our own immigration policy, and it's very different from the UK. Anybody in Jersey can go to the UK tomorrow and buy or rent a house, they can afford it, and get a job. People in the UK can't come to Jersey and do that. We do have strict controls, but there are constraints on how far we can go. And to take Philip's point, yeah, if we want to be in the common travel area with the UK, we've got to accept some constraints, because otherwise your Frenchman comes to Jersey because we allow them to come to Jersey and they get on the next plane to London. So having our own distinct policy means you don't have the channel that says go straight through and avoid immigration. It means join the queue. So let's recognize our constraint. We already have our own policy. If we can do more, fine, but there's a limit to what we can do.
I would have liked to reply to that.
Not allowed.
Wait till you make the States Chamber, won't you?
I think the comments around reforming how we look at immigration and who comes here is essential. And the second part of that is how do we treat people when they get here? I think the current licensed versus licensing system for registered to work or entitled to work only creates a two-tier system. And I think one of the hard reasons to attract someone over is when you say, oh, you're going to work long days in hospitality, you're going to really want to skill up on that. And after all of that, you're only allowed to rent somewhere that's non-qualified. And for that, you get 140 square foot for the same price as someone gets 480. Oh, that person's come into a financial institution under a licensed scheme. They can rent in Castle Key. They can rent any kind of licensed property. And so if we really want to look at how we address who comes here and who addresses the need of our industries, our key workers, we need to start asking, what are those shortfalls, and are we going to treat them fairly when they get here?
Thank you. Okay. And just a reminder to everybody at home that we have one missing candidate here tonight, Karen Wilson. So there should be 7 candidates, but unfortunately she's not in the island. We weren't able to bring her online. I want to make sure we're mopping up St Clement specific questions before we finish. Will the candidates, says Dave Crocker, if elected, lean towards island-wide big policies at the cost of local parish matters? And also, would you consider running a surgery for parishioners on a regular basis, similar to St Relard's deputies? I'm going to start with Ken.
Thank you. So the duty of the deputy is to his parishioners, to the people who've elected him. You will shortly be getting a leaflet through the door and from myself. And one of the key points in that leaflet is an undertaking from myself to hold regular surgeries, either at the parish hall or at the Eastern Good Companions Club, where parishioners can come to me. They can bring their problems, whether it's with the States Department, whether it's with housing, perhaps a dispute with a landlord or one of the utilities over a bill, and I will do my utmost to try and resolve that problem. My focus is on the parish. That's what I'm being elected for, and that's what I'll stand up for. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay. I think shortly you will get our manifesto through the door. Our manifesto is split into 2 sections. One section is on what we hope to do for the parish, and the other section is what we have to do island-wide. Because let's face it, although you represent the parish, you represent the parish in the assembly, and that is an island-wide assembly. So as far as surgeries are concerned, I've never done one. I'm readily available. I attend things like the coffee morning, the community support do, and people are there to speak to me. I have many parishioners will ring up or email me. From talking to a lot of the other deputies, I think it's slightly different in St Hilly, but a lot of the other deputies, they've had these surgeries and it's really nobody comes, so it's not really worthwhile.
Whether we like it or not, the idea of the new districts was to create mini senatorial constituencies, and the deputies who represent St Clement are, as Lindsay has said, representatives in the states. They have island-wide responsibilities. Now, of course, they have parish responsibilities too. And when I was a senator a few years ago, I represented individuals from time to time who would come to me and seek help, even though I was not a parish representative. And I imagine the same kind of thing would happen if I were to be elected as a deputy of St Clement. I'm not sure whether or not I would hold a surgery. If that was a useful thing to do, I would certainly consider it.
Thank you, Mark.
The election is for deputies of St Clement in the States Assembly. So yes, there's some local issues you've got to deal with, but it is the States Assembly for the whole island. Now, most of the questions today have actually been island-wide issues, because the issues in St Clement are not a million miles away from those in St Ballard. There are some specifics that we need to deal with, and they're in the Alliance manifesto, but otherwise they're island-wide. I wouldn't favour surgeries. I think if people want something, rather than wait a month until the next scheduled surgery, you phone up, you email. Indeed, people are doing that already to me, and I'm not yet elected. So much simpler than having formal surgeries. People know how to contact their deputies and should do it whenever they want.
Okay. Alex?
I'll say, why not both? I would be readily available on phone to meet, but I think that the rhythm and commitment to the parish through surgeries is good, and I would commit to doing that. Would I just be representing the parish? As has been said, the role of acting in the States is almost kind of multiple pillars. You've got one is actually making sure the island is prosperous externally. Money is often made through the export of a service, whether that be finance, whether that be tourism. Making sure the island functions internally for the people, making sure you represent and are aware of the challenges of your parishioners. And then that fourth one is to the surgeries and to the direct contact, which is to say you are there for the person. And I would commit to all four of those.
Thank you, Barbara.
Took the word out of my mouth. Yes, it was about looking at both, looking at having a surgery, how often that would be. We just have to try. But certainly, yes, is that you make yourself available by phone or email. Because I'm there for St Clement's first and foremost. But of course, things spill over into an island-wide issue, housing and everything else. So it's getting that right blend, but making sure that the parishioners at St Clement's, that their voice is actually heard, putting people first.
Thank you. I'm going to do one final question for you all to wrap up. I can't get to all the questions, but basically I'm going to do two together. What would you do if you were elected in your first 100 days? And would you like a ministerial job? If so, which one? Starting with Lindsay.
Obviously, if things went well in the election in the first 100 days, we would be trying to put our manifesto forward to the States Assembly and putting Mark forward as Chief Minister. That would be our first task if we were to get the amount of seats. Would I want a ministerial job? I wouldn't say no to a ministerial job, but I wouldn't say no to planning. I've really enjoyed being on planning in this. So PPC is great. So there are a lot of fantastically interesting roles in the States Assembly. You don't have to be a minister, but if I was offered a ministerial job, yes, I'd probably take it. And I found Home Affairs quite fascinating. So there we go.
Thank you. Philip?
What is set out in the manifesto of the JLC is what I would like to do in the first 1,000 days, or however many days there are in the term of office, if elected. And I have already said that if I am elected, I would be the candidate of the coalition of the Progress Party and the JLC for Chief Minister.
Thank you. Mark?
I'm the candidate of the Jersey Alliance for Chief Minister. We think it's really important that the people of Jersey know if they're voting for a particular party, who is going to be the chief minister of the island. What I want to do in my first 100 days, read the manifesto. It's a very long one. Some people might find it boring, but we've got detail in there. The officials will be looking at that now, as they will be with all the manifestos. And I would say to them very early on, so where's the implementation plan for what we want to do? I'm being told we couldn't do anything for 6 months. I do not accept that for 1 minute. If we are elected, we'll be doing things from day one in line with our manifesto.
Thank you, Alex.
I would, at the first of my 100 days, I would be in the Assembly voting on who will be Chief Minister, voting on who will be ministers and who will be in scrutiny. And I will be using my vote very carefully to make sure that the right people for the right job who will work together are in those roles. Whether that would lead to me having a assistant ministry position depends on which candidates are elected. I could see myself supporting in economic development, sport and culture. I can see it potentially in treasury. And I can definitely see it in environment. Those are where I might lean to, but I can see equal roles in scrutiny, and I really make sure that those 100 days are setting up a functioning States Assembly that works together.
Thank you, Barbara.
Certainly the first thing I've got to do as being a new person is to learn how the states work and about the systems, what you can, what you can't do, how do you do a proposition. And when I learn how to do a proposition, it will be I'd be delighted if I could actually get the double taxation of a social security pension removed. I'd be delighted.
Thank you.
So, like the Jersey Alliance and the Jersey Liberal Conservatives, Reform Jersey would expect to enact its manifesto. Our very first action will be to give the relevant civil servants our housing action plan, and we would ask them to implement that as soon as possible. As to whether or not a ministerial position would be offered, I don't know. I will consider anything where I can be of use within the States.
Thank you very much. Okay, and just a reminder again that Karen Wilson wasn't here, and I want to say thank you to all candidates for being here to answer the questions. I assume we have a lot of unanswered questions. I assume you are all open to people contacting you directly to get those questions answered.
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you everybody at home for the questions that you've given us. It's been a good, interesting, varied topic of discussion, I think. A reminder that if you are not in the island, you can still register for postal voting. So please do go to vote.ga to register there. I think it's
You can't.
You can't.
you can't.
No.
Not postal voting.
It says till the 10th of May.
10th of
So if you've
10th of May.
registered by the 10th
No,
of
if you've registered.
by the 10th of May, you can register for postal voting.
Yes, I don't mean register for voting. You can register for postal voting. So if you're on the electoral roll, and you're going to be out of the island for some reason, say you've suddenly been called away on business or a holiday, you can still register for a postal vote, and that is until Wednesday, the 1st of June. You have that time. Okay, and not on the electoral roll there. And anything else? Any other questions? The manifestos, I'm sure, will be going around to people, and look on vote.ge for any updates on anything. And the hustings are being held in person in St Clement as well. I'm sure people will be getting the details about that. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
For joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
joining us online.
Yeah.
Thank you.